What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Young Guns podcast. Today, we are breaking down a round two matchup in the West. The Winnipeg Jets, fresh off of their Game 7 double OT victory from a night ago, are going to be going up against the high standard ceiling perennial Stanley Cup contender for these past 5 years or so, the Dallas Stars, who remain undefeated in Game Sevens under Pete DeBoer as a head coach, and for his tenure around the league, he is still undefeated after 9 tries in Game 7, and so they've put the Colorado Avalanche behind them, and now move into round two for another heavyweight tilt against the Jets. So, Luca, what are your initial thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, so obviously, if you look at these two teams, right, and you obviously take a look at the playoff picture right here, both teams ended up in Game 7, and what Game 7s both of them were. The Winnipeg Jets, tying the game with 1.5 seconds to go in the third period. Cole Perfetti burying the goal there to make
Insane
it 3-3.
tip in.
Insane tip, insane play by the Jets to be able to score that goal, and then Adam Lowry scores the overtime winner in double overtime to send the Jets to the second round. And in Dallas and in crazy fashion, the Colorado Avalanche were up 2-0 going into the third period. It looked like it was going to end the way that everybody, I think a lot of people expected, which was that Colorado was going to close out the series. And then Mikko Rantanen decided, nope, I'm going to stop my old team from being able to go through, and basically told the Colorado Avalanche, showed them a little bit of a big fuck you, and basically told them, go fuck yourselves. And this is my house.
Yeah.
This is my situation.
I took my money. I ran off to a contender, and now I'm burning you guys in the playoffs.
Exactly. So it was the Mikko Rantanen show in Game 7 for Dallas, and now we're here. Both teams facing off each other in round number 2. And, this is a really entertaining matchup. And let's just jump into straight for the Dallas Stars and look a little bit at their team stats and their player stats. Mikko Rantanen led the way for them, especially over the last 3 games. He had 11 points in his last 3 games against Colorado, which means he only had 1 in his first 4, which goes to show you just how much Mikko Rantanen stepped up over the last 3 games to help Dallas and propel them to a second round. To the second round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs. 12 points in 7 games for him. Rupe Hintz with a point a game, 7 points in 7 games. Wyatt Johnston, who scored the game-winning goal for Dallas, 7 points in 7 games for him. Thomas Harley has been a big story for them, 5 points in 7 games. Seguin with 4. And then if you go down the list, obviously everybody else, getting some points as well. Duchene with 3 points. Jamie Benn only 2. And then if you go down the list, only Maverick Bourque and Leon Bichelle with no points, and Jake Ottinger with a .911 save percentage. So talking a little bit about the Dallas Stars, what's interesting about them is they did this without Jason Robertson or Miro Heiskanen.
Yep.
And I think that's what makes that even more impressive, is the fact that they were able to get through Colorado without arguably their 2 best players, depending on who you ask. And that's a big story going into this series, because both guys are expected to at least be back at some point in the second round.
Right.
Miro Heiskanen, I think, is closer than Jason Robertson. But if Dallas can get those 2 guys back at some point during the series, it could really tilt this series in a different way. And, obviously you look at the Stars and you look at their line combinations and you look at just how they're built. And we talked about this in round 1, the depth that they have across the lineup. And all of this is being looked at without the likes of Jason Robertson as well, not being in this lineup. Like, it's a great lineup from top to bottom. Their forward core is just great from top to bottom, and they're able to find ways to score. They're able to be, productive in all 3 or all 4 lines, and they can rely on all 4 lines, which I think is huge. And if you look at their defense as well, right, give a lot of credit to a guy like Thomas Harley, who's taken on a bigger role. Esa Lindell's been one of the best defensive defensemen in the league. But even guys like Cody Ceci and Ilya Lyubushkin, playing big minutes, being able to, take advantage of their minutes that they've been able to play. And look, it hasn't always been pretty for Cody Ceci, at least this season, and sometimes even during these playoffs, but he's managed to find a way to be able to shut down a little bit and kind of play his game, and it seems to be working. And then their third pair of Liam Bichelle and Alex Petrovic, like that seems to be a really good third line that seems to be working. And obviously, look, with the expectation of Heiskanen and Lundqvist and obviously Jason Robertson, like Dallas just seems to have everything going for them the right way. And they have Jake Ottinger, who's playing really, really well for them as well. So, combine that combination and you can understand why they beat Colorado. And it's a tough opponent. I mean, Colorado was no pushover as
No,
well.
they played very well.
Right. McKinnon was solid. I think Colorado lacked a little bit of like their other star talent. I don't think Makar was at his best in this series. I think they didn't really get the best performances out of everybody, but they still pushed Dallas to 7, and they were pretty much in it up until the last 10 minutes of the third period. So I think there needs to be a lot of credit being given to Colorado, but at the same time for Dallas, this is I think a big season for them. And with the acquisition of Mikko Rantanen that they made during the trade deadline, trading Logan Stankoven and a lot of futures to get him, like it's showing that it's paying dividends for them right now. And I think that that's a big thing for Dallas going into this series is they're going to need Mikko Rantanen to be at his best again. They're going to need Rupe Hintz to continue what he's doing. And obviously, they're going to need the rest of their team to just continue playing at the level that they're capable of. And if they're able to add Jason Robertson to that, even better. If they're able to add Miro Heiskanen into that, it takes the pressure off the decor that's currently there and allows the Dallas Stars to be better. And then if you look at the Winnipeg Jets, they're in a little bit of a different position because they lost Mark Scheifele and they also lost Josh Morrissey to injury during this St. Louis Blues series. And that's a big loss for the Jets because obviously Mark Scheifele being their number one center and with everything going on with him this season and the expectations that he had, he was really coming into his own this year. And then obviously look at Josh Morrissey being their best defenseman. It takes away from the likes of Neil, takes away from the production of him. But, it gives a guy like Neil Pionk, who was fantastic in Game 7, by the way, against the St. Louis Blues, to kind of give a bigger role. But obviously, Morrissey is still listed in this lineup. We don't know how long he's out for and if he'll miss any games. But obviously, the Jets did lose him for Game 7. So hopefully it's not too long. But the Jets are in a little bit of a different position in the sense where I don't necessarily think it was the most perfect series for the Jets. They had their struggles, I think, against St. Louis. I think St. Louis really gave them a good run for their money and really pushed the Jets
To the limit.
right? And scared them off. But the big question mark for the Winnipeg Jets is not their forwards. It's not their defense. It's their Vezina and Hart Trophy candidate, Connor Hellebuyck. And I can't believe we're having this conversation in 2025. The guy who is in the conversation for the Vezina and the Hart, and he was arguably the Winnipeg Jets' worst player in these playoffs. Yes, he bounced back, I think, after the third goal or after the third goal that St. Louis scored yesterday. But even still, he's been god-awful this year for the Winnipeg Jets in these playoffs. If you look at his stats, just to kind of talk about it, 4 wins, 3 losses, 385 goals against average, 830 save percentage. He's let in 26 goals in 7 games. It's not good enough for Connor
It's not good at
Hellebuyck.
all.
And he's going to need to be better. And if you just look at the stats really quickly, Kyle Connor led the way with 12 points. He's the Jets' best player. Mark Scheifele, 6 points in 5 games. He's a big loss. And obviously we have at fourth on the list, Cole Perfetti, who scored some big goals for the Jets in these playoffs, has been a difference maker for them. They're going to expect him to obviously take a bigger role with Scheifele being out. But the big question in this one is obviously going to be, how good is Connor Hellebuyck going to be? And Zach, I want to know your opinions on both these teams and what do you see from these two? And do you think Connor Hellebuyck bounces back in this series?
Well, I'll start on the Jets and Connor Hellebuyck since we're already there.
Okay.
But he did look shaky in Game 7, as he did in a couple of the games in the series, where you see him not stopping savable shots, which is crazy to think. A guy of Vezina caliber who is outstanding for the past 2 regular seasons, Vezina candidate in both, and I believe winning it last year.
Yep.
Connor Hellebuyck, a guy who you'd think like he's only not going to save the shots that he can't see. The shots coming in traffic where he can't track the puck. He can't, the puck is out of his eyesight and he can't make the save. But when he could see the puck, you'd assume him to stand in front of it. And if you look at the goals last night, and most notably the goal from Matthew Joseph, the second goal for St. Louis, no screen, the defenseman is trying to play the shot. it seems like a harmless shot going through, and even for goal number 3, that is, and it just beats him. I think it's his battle right now is definitely mental, because he is a capable goalie of this league. Like, don't get me wrong, but
Right.
it's 2 playoffs in a row. They didn't have the benefit of getting past round 1 last year. This year they have, and I thought it was a really resilient effort by the Jets, who, like you mentioned, they're depleted. It's not a team that has that kind of scoring depth that a Colorado or a Dallas has,
Right.
where you have some stars playing on as far down the lineup as your third line. This is a team that employs Vladimir Nemestikov as their second line center. No credit, no discredit on Nemestikov at all, and I know they re-signed them this year. But if you look at this, if you look at the skill wise, and in terms of how much of a threat a lot of their guys are offensively, you're looking at Kyle Connor, and now without Mark Scheifele, Ehlers is very inconsistent, and then it's a bunch of other guys, and Adam Lowry got the big goal for them. Cole Perfetti stepped up, but I worry about this Jets team. Number one, on Hellebuyck, is maybe the weight is lifted off of his shoulders because they got through round 1, and he's going to be able to kind of go back to his senses a little bit more. Or if you're going through the eye test and say like round 1 is going to be what we see in round 2, then that's scary for the Jets. And what's scary is that they don't have, I don't think, the depth up front to go toe to toe with Dallas in potentially a longer series if needed be.
Yep.
Looking at this lineup here right now, it's pretty depleted. I know they got Gabe Vilardi back as well and during the series.
Right.
And they have some good role pieces. Iafallo, I was impressed with in this series. I thought he did well in his role. He's a good playoff guy for them. But with their decor, losing Josh Morrissey is, I hope he's back early in the series. I don't know.
He's still listed on this, but I think the replacement, if we look at I don't know if I have it up here, but I think the replacement would be like Logan Stanley, or I'm not sure. I don't know if who the Jets would have as their like 7th defenseman. I haven't really paid attention to that all that much, but what the expectation is that whoever's coming in wouldn't be like, is not going to replace the minutes that Josh Morrissey gives you.
No, they're not going to replace the Josh Morrissey role. That's for sure. They're going to probably try to spread everything out.
Right.
I don't think they're going to want to expect too much out of their third pairing. I know like Duchene is a guy they love in the playoffs because he puts his body on the line, but I think the minutes that they have him playing is good, especially for him at his age.
Right.
Hayden Fleury is, they're not going to expect too much out of him as well. It puts more pressure, honestly, on guys like Dylan DeMello and Neil Pionk, who are steady veterans and who could play those kind of minutes and add the creativity to their offense. If you throw in a guy like Logan Stanley, it's a lot more of what you have, and it's big defensive presences who maybe at times struggle to move the puck. And is it something that Dallas could expose with their forecheck? It's a wait and see, but I don't like the matchup for the Jets. And now let's switch back to Dallas, and how I view them. Well, that series. Let's just start off by saying that series against Colorado, you could probably agree with me, could have gone either way. The difference, in my opinion, two good goalies. Both teams didn't have trouble scoring goals. Most games were back and forth, exchanging of leads. There wasn't a team I felt that was, maybe Colorado was a little bit more dangerous a 5-on-5, a little bit. But if you look at the difference in the series, it was the special teams, because Dallas struck at 30% on the power play in round 1, which was, versus Colorado's 13% on the power play, which is very unusual for them. I think that makes a big difference. And,
right.
You go against a team like Winnipeg that, in the regular season is usually a team that's great on the penalty kill. I thought they were okay against St. Louis because, St. Louis were able to get some important power play goals when needed. But their power play is definitely not where Dallas is at. And I thought about also, Dallas is, we talk about how good their top 12 is, but I don't think we've also seen the best out of them either. I think especially their top 9, I think they're a team just like Florida in the East, that their top 9 could just hit that second gear. I think you've touched on it in a previous video as well. They could hit that second gear and then, they're off to the races, right? You got a guy like Wyatt Johnston who, who was amazing in Game 7 and also scored a big goal in Game 5 or 6, I believe, within the first minute of the game. I believe it was in Game 5. A guy who's 21 years old, but he's a rising star in this league, and you have him on your third line with a guy like Jamie Benn of Dadonov, who have experience and the skill to get it done as well. Like, this top nine is scary. It's as scary as Florida's. They'll get Miro Heiskanen back, but I think concerning for them is that Miro Heiskanen is coming back from a knee injury, so I wouldn't expect him to be fully 100% as he comes back.
Right.
But I think, for Dallas, what may be holding them back in the series is if their decor gets finally exposed a little bit, and Jake Ottinger that's not able to stand on his head. But all in all, I see this as a series where I think Dallas is going to win. I see them winning the series pretty comfortably, maybe even in 5 games.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I'm a little bit torn in this series because I think the Jets have a lot to prove, and I think for them, right, this is about trying to show that they're able to get it done in the playoffs. And for me, the only concerns, and it's like you said before, it's like you mentioned, the concern for me is what kind of Connor Hellebuyck are you going to get? And the reason I say that is, look, we've obviously seen how he's able to handle the pressure in round 1, right? He wasn't very good. He was the worst goalie in the playoffs by a long shot, like just didn't play well at all. But this is a guy that, like we mentioned, is capable of winning a Vezina. He's won a Vezina. He's being nominated for the Hart and the Vezina this season. So you can't take that away from Connor Hellebuyck. Right. And the truth is that, if Connor Hellebuyck can turn into the Connor Hellebuyck of the regular season, and if he can become the goalie that, won them the Vezina, then I think the Jets have a chance in this series. Because the thing is that, all you really need in these playoffs is your goaltender to get hot at the right time. And, I know Dallas is a really, tough team, and they're a juggernaut, and they've got really good lines all over the place. But the Jets, they've got something going over there. And, I think their depth is underappreciated in the sense where right now it looks really depleted. But a guy like Adam Lowry has really changed the complexion of the way they play hockey. And, I really like the way Cole Perfetti's come into his own. Nick Ehlers, like you mentioned, a little bit of an inconsistent player, but Kyle Connor's really coming into becoming one of the best players in the league, if he isn't already. And obviously with the loss of Mark Scheifele, if they're able to get him back at some point in the series, he's going to be a huge help. My only thing is, though, with the Jets is I just don't know if Connor Hellebuyck is going to be able to give them that performance. And you look at Dallas and, like, for me, what impresses me the most about Dallas is, like, we talked about this before, but, all of this without Jason Robertson. But even when Jason Robertson gets back into the lineup, you can push Evgeny Dadonov down to the 4th line, maybe scratch one of the 3 guys at the bottom of the tier list, and then you're probably bringing down, let's say, Tyler Seguin to your second line, or you're bringing down Mikael Granlund to your second line, and then you're throwing Robertson probably on the top line with Rupe Hintz and Mikko Rantanen. Like, Dallas is doing all of this, and they did all of this without one of their top forwards and one of their top D. And I think no matter what happens, even if Connor Hellebuyck is in net or not, and even if he's playing at the level that he's playing at, even if he becomes, let's say, a Vezina Trophy candidate, Dallas just has a lot, and they have so much that can stop you. And even in nets, like, we talk about Connor Hellebuyck being a Vezina candidate, but let's not take away from the fact that Jake Ottinger is a very good goaltender, right? And you're not playing Jordan Binnington in this series. And again, no disrespect to Jordan Binnington. I thought he had a great series, but he's not better than Jake Ottinger, at least not right now. And that obviously plays a role. And I just think that, you look at Dallas, and we talked about this in the first round video, is that whoever won the series between Dallas and Colorado ultimately was going to end up in the Cup final. And I still stick by that. I think Dallas probably gets this in 6 games. I don't think it's a 7-game series. I think Jets might win 2 games, probably both at home if they do. But I just think that Dallas is too strong. I think they have too much. I think they're very well built, very well balanced, very well coached. And if they're getting the best out of Mikko Rantanen right now, then the sky's the limit for Dallas. So,
especially considering that he hasn't been playing in this series, at least with Jason Robertson. He was right on that line with a guy in Mikael Granlund, who otherwise is is probably in their bottom six, and and Rupe Hintz, but it's just Mikko Rantanen is a guy who I just view as, Dallas didn't necessarily need a Mikko Rantanen, but they're happy that they have him. And
Yeah.
he's another alpha dog to add to their forward core, and he is a difference maker. Regardless of who, let's stop talking about, he was a beneficiary of playing with Nathan McKinnon, like Nathan
Right.
McKinnon wasn't a beneficiary of playing with him. Mikko
Right.
Rantanen is a star in this league. You watch the guy every night. He's physically dominant. It's hard to get the puck off of him with his big frame and how he protects it. He's got amazing hands, and obviously he's got that elite shot.
Right.
He's an alpha dog in this league, like I said before. And in Game 7, he proved it that he has the kind of ability to put up 4 points in a single playoff period and a hat trick in that same period. So, like, you're getting a guy like that going, and how many answers does Winnipeg really have for, not just a Mikko Rantanen, but like a Jason Robertson, a Rupe Hintz, let's not forget Wyatt Johnston, Matt Duchene, Tyler Seguin.
Right.
I don't know how they're going to be able to deal with these guys. Especially at 5-on-5, this team is going to be, especially for the 2 home games that Dallas is going to have initially. Actually, no, it's going to be in Winnipeg for games 1 and 2, but for the home games where Dallas is going to have the last say on the final line matchup, Dallas has got a lot of ways to go about this, because Winnipeg is a team that's not as deep as them, and Dallas could kind of fix their lines in that way.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, right, is let's, if we talk about, let's say, the opponents, right, and this is not a disrespect to the St. Louis Blues, but the St. Louis Blues are not as good as the Colorado Avalanche or the Dallas Stars, right? And you look at the matchup that the Winnipeg Jets had against them, and the Blues, like I said, full credit to the St. Louis Blues. They had a great series. Like, this is not, I'm not trying to disrespect the St. Louis Blues, but the Blues don't have the same type of caliber that the Colorado Avalanche or the Dallas Stars have. And I think that for the Jets, the fact that they struggled to be able to close that series out quicker than they did, and the fact that it took them to second overtime to be able to do it. And I know that could be looked at one way or another, but the truth is that the Jets probably win this series in 5 games if Connor Hellebuyck plays the way Connor Hellebuyck is able to play, right? And that's just a fact. But the fact is that they didn't do that. And so I think for the Jets, they're very reliant on their goaltending, but they're also very reliant on what they're going to be able to get from their top guys, right? If Kyle Connor doesn't get going, if Mark Scheifele doesn't get going, if a guy like, Josh Morrissey doesn't get going, it's going to be very hard for the Jets to be in this series. And obviously, if you look, like, let's just look at the stats, right? Kyle Connor at 12 points in 7 games. The next highest is Mark Scheifele with 6. Yes, he missed 2 games. And then Mason Appleton has 6 points. Mason Appleton is on the Jets' 4th line or 3rd line, right? Like, you know what I mean? And we could talk about depth scoring, but then Perfetti's got 5 and 7. Neil Pionk's got 5 and 7. Nemesnikov's got 4 and 7. Like, they don't really have that. They have depth, but they don't have the same type of depth that the Dallas Stars have, right? Like, if you look at the Stars, right, 12 points, 7 points, 7 points, Harley with 5, Seguin with 4, Marchment, Duchene, even Cody Ceci had 3 points, right? Jamie Benn had 2. So it's like Dallas seems to have a lot more depth compared to the Jets, and they have a lot more quality than compared to the Winnipeg Jets. And even just in terms of the opponents, Dallas Stars, they've played Colorado. They understand what it is to play a very good cup contending team and beat them. So Dallas has that familiarity. They have the understanding of being able to go into a series against a really good team and beat them, right? And like we said, and it's like we mentioned before, right? They did this without 2 of their star players.
I know.
Like, we're you know what I mean? Like, in my opinion, and I hate to say it, and I know maybe Winnipeg fans will disagree with me on this, I just don't see how the Jets have a chance in this series. I really don't. Even like, if they get Mark Scheifele back and Morrissey's able to play, I think it'll be a lot closer than we're giving it credit for. But for me, the big question mark is a net. Like, how good is Connor Hellebuyck really going to be? If Connor Hellebuyck can play the way he's capable of, and really turn into that goalie that we all expect him to be in the playoffs, then yeah, I think the Jets could probably force this series to 7. But if Hellebuyck plays the way he played against the Blues, this series is done in 4 or 5. Like dude, he wasn't like, and that's unfortunate, right? Because we're talking about a Vezina caliber goaltender, but you're coming up against Dallas. Like, you need to be at your best. If you want to, you can look at it and maybe say like he took a vacation in round 1 and he wasn't at his best and they still ended up winning, and like, fair enough. But like, you can't do that against Dallas, man. You have to be at your best through all four games, and then any other game after that, because if you're not going to do that, they're just going to pounce on you, right? And for Dallas, I'm sure they're going to want to make this a short series. They just went to 7 against Colorado. They'll take a 4-game series any day of the week if it means they're going to get rest, right? So, the Jets, I'm not questioning their will or their commitment. I'm just hoping that they're going to come into this series and that Connor Hellebuyck is going to come into this series and really change his game and make this series interesting, because I think these are two very good teams that can play fun hockey and enjoyable hockey. And I think if these two teams can play their game, it could be a really fun series to watch. And I want that. I want to be able to see Connor Hellebuyck at his best, duel it out with Jake Ottinger. I think that would be fantastic. But if it's just going to be a one team series where Dallas is just going to like come in and dominate, and Hellebuyck is going to shit the bed again, like, it's just going to suck. And I think it's going to suck for the Jets. So I apologize to Jets fans. I'm going to say Dallas in 6, and I think that I'm being generous when I say that. But, I'm saying Dallas in 6. I'm hoping the Jets can make it a close series, but I just don't see it. Dallas is too good. They're way too good. Yeah. They're built to win the cup. And in my opinion, like, if they don't win the cup, then whoever beats them deserves to win the cup, because that's a juggernaut. Like, just from top to bottom, it's a juggernaut.
I feel now that Dallas beating Colorado in round 1 now have the confidence that they could beat anybody.
Yeah, of course.
Going into this playoffs, Colorado was personally my pick to win the whole thing. I thought that team was fantastic. I didn't see a lot of flaws to their game in round 1, and they still lost.
Yeah,
that's just how good both of these two teams are. And I think now that with the confidence to beat a team like Colorado, and now I don't think it really matters who's in front of them now. Now they're set with a purpose, and I think they might steamroll their way all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals and maybe meet a team like Florida. That's the way I see this going down. And I said, they'll probably beat Winnipeg in something like 5 games, but it could even be in 4. They could even this could be a sweep. Yeah. And it's nothing against Winnipeg, because Winnipeg, they won a series, right? Let's give them some credit. They beat a team like that. They stayed resilient against a team like St. Louis that had, because of the whole goaltending scandal and because of some of the injuries, they had all the momentum in this series. Right. And then Winnipeg kind of just took it back, and they, at an opportune time. It's crazy the way things went down in game 7 for them. In the span of a minute and a half, they scored 2 goals that they needed to tie a hockey game in a game 7, and then they won it in double OT. That, if that doesn't show character in a group, I don't know what doesn't. And it's their captain, Adam Lowry, who scores for them in double overtime.
And let's just take a look at this. So I just want to take a look at the matchups, because it's very interesting. So obviously, if you watch Dallas through the first 4 games of the series, right, they won 1 at home, they lost 1 at home. But the losses that Dallas had were pretty big losses, right? 5-1, 4-0, and 7-4, right? So typically when Dallas loses a hockey game, they're losing a game by a pretty big margin, right? At least in the first round against Colorado. Right. But when they won in overtime. They won 6-2. And then the final game, they won 4-2. And what's interesting is that Dallas went 3-1 at home. Obviously, on the road, they weren't the best, but that's typically normal. And if you look at the Jets series, again, look at the Jets losses, right? 7-2, 5-1, and 5-2. So these are teams, both Dallas and Winnipeg, and it's kind of interesting to look at this, right? That are very good at home, which I think is normal for a playoff team, because, most of the time you should be good at home. But the thing that's interesting is that both these teams tend to lose big, right, when they lose. And so I think this could be very interesting, because what it shows me is that I think the start of the games for both teams is really going to determine how well the game goes, right? And what I mean by that is, you know, when you look at the losses, I think it's always good to look at how they bounce back after a loss. But the other thing too is when you look at a big score and you look at their score line, it says a lot about the team and how they handle a game when they're down by a couple of goals. And I think both these teams tend to simply not give up, but it's a lot harder for them to be able to, let's say, handle the situation when they're down by a couple of goals. So I think this series is going to be a lot determined by who scores first, right? Who's able to get, let's say, a 2-0 lead in the game or a 3-1 lead in the game and be able to take a 2-3 goal lead in this series. And, I think whoever scores first and whoever gets a good start to the game, I think is going to be the determining factor in this series. And, that's why I think goaltending is really important, because they're going to need their goaltenders to be at their best, but they're also going to be able to have to defend well. And at the same time, they're going to have to make sure that that whoever it is, whether it's Winnipeg or Dallas, that they're not going down by more than 1 or 2 goals. Because, right, we've seen that when they do go down by a couple of goals, it could end in a pretty big disaster in terms of the losses that they've had. So to me, I think there's a big conversation to be have about how you start. And at the same time, I think it's also about managing the game properly and being able to get that first goal and how important that first goal might be for a team like Dallas or a team like Winnipeg. The good thing about the Jets, though, and I'll give them a lot of credit, is they're very good at home, right? They're 4-0 at home. They haven't lost a game at home, right? So if you're the Jets starting off their first 2 games at home, that could bode well for Winnipeg, right? It could bode really well for Winnipeg, because what it'll show them is they know that Dallas hasn't done well on the road in the first round against Colorado, and Winnipeg has confidence. They came back from a big game against St. Louis in the game 7 at home, so they've got confidence playing in front of their fans, and that could help the Jets a little bit in this series. At least take the first game or the second game and really see if they can take control of this series. So maybe for the Jets starting at home and being able to play in front of their fans for the first 2 games and not having to travel might allow the Winnipeg Jets to start this series off a little bit better. So I think there's some positives for Winnipeg to come into this series. It's just going to be dependent on how good Connor Hellebuyck could be. But just something that I wanted to add to
and they're a better team. And I think Winnipeg is also a better team starting with a lead than catching up in a game.
Right.
They're not a team that's built to catch up in games. This has been the story for them.
Except for game 7 of yesterday's game, but yeah.
Yeah, literally. But even it was a story of their team last year in the playoffs, and it's going to be a story for them this year as well. It's all regular season. This is a team that prefers to play in front of a lead and dictate how they're going to respond to a team that is hungry for a goal. It's a team that's going to pounce, that wants to allow Connor Hellebuyck to get into his groove, and they feel better about that when they have a lead in a hockey game, and I think even for himself. So I think their starts of their game are going to be important, and like the points that you mentioned as well. But against a team like Dallas, who could score in bunches, if most games become a track meet, I have the edge in Dallas for Dallas in all of those games.
Yeah, and just
one thing, because Dallas could score at will. They've shown it in pretty much every game except a couple against maybe 1 or 2 against Colorado, but they've shown it based on the skill sets that they have and what they've been able to do during the regular season. There's a team that could score at will,
right?
And I'm confident that I think even with a Hellebuyck who's Vezina caliber, I still don't see a way out in this series for the Jets, unfortunately.
Fair enough. And I just want to say one last thing before we end this off. But for me, I think what's interesting too, and I noticed this in the Winnipeg Jets series a lot more than the Dallas series, was the physicality of the Jets, right? And if you look at their penalty minutes, right, and you just look at how big this was, right? Like Scheifele 12 minutes, Appleton 12, Pionk, Nemesnikov, Lowry 14, right? These are all, obviously there was scrums and stuff that ended up happening in game misconducts, but for me, the Jets are not afraid to get into the corners, get into the dirty areas, get in people's faces. And I feel like if they can continue that and be that aggressive team that they can be, I think it might give Dallas some problems. But at the same time, like Dallas too was in that position. It's just, I think this series could be a really physical series. And I think Winnipeg's got a little bit more physicality compared to Dallas, right? Dallas is more talent and there's more skill on that team. Whereas I think with Winnipeg, there's a little bit more tenacity and a little bit more physicality. So I think if the Jets can do that, they might be able to wear off Dallas a little bit, which could bode well for the Jets. But I still agree with you. I think no matter what happens and no matter how good at goaltending the Jets get, I still think Dallas wins this series. I'm going to give them Dallas in 6. But I think it's going to be a fun series. And look, you know what? Out of all 4 series that are currently going to be available, I think besides, let's say, Florida and Toronto, this is probably the second most entertaining series, in my opinion, just in terms of the quality of the teams that are coming in. I think it's a better series than Vegas and Edmonton, and I think it's definitely a better series than Washington and Carolina. So that's kind of my opinion on it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right.
So guys, thank you for watching the Young Guns podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this video, and we'll see you guys on the next episode of the Young Guns podcast. This is Luca
and Zach.
Peace out.